Street Fighter 4 is probably one of the most well-known and beloved fighting games ever made, and with not only vanilla but also all of the game's updates receiving critical acclaim and strong sales, it's safe to say that Capcom hit the fighting game jackpot when they released this banger of a game. And while I could make a video about how SF4 essentially resurrected the series from the cold jail cell that is obscurity, I want to cover something a bit more quirky for now. Since we're talking about stuff that's ridiculously popular, allow me to introduce this little device you may have heard of called the iPhone. First released in 2007, which makes it older than the average modern-day Guilty Gear fan, Apple's brand new device took the world by storm when it was first announced, and after a while, the App Store was born, allowing users all around the world to download apps from the comfort of their own home. With this came the birth of mobile games. Games like Snake and that one game that my mum used to have on her work phone where you play as a bouncy ball were awesome, but they can never dream of coming close to home console games in terms of overall quality. With the iPhone, however, mobile games became one step closer to achieving such a goal, and one of the developers leading this push towards console-quality mobile games was Capcom. They brought so many of their games and IPs to Apple products, and God only knows how much time I spent on Resident Evil 4 Mobile as a kid, but you clicked on this video to hear about one specific port of theirs. On March 10th, 2010, Capcom released Street Fighter 4 on iPhone, a handheld version of the game that not only features pre-rendered sprites and background images for its characters and stages respectively, but it also has new gameplay features too. But that's not all, because on June 30th, 2011, an updated version called Street Fighter 4 Volt was released, and then another version called Street Fighter 4 Champion Edition released on July 12th, 2017. While I don't have access to these games anymore, I spent a lot of time with them back in the day, so I feel that I'm qualified to discuss them at length, sort of, if that makes sense. Without further ado, let's explore the iOS versions of Street Fighter 4.
Street Fighter 4, son! Street Fighter 4! Street Fighter 4! Street Fighter 4! Say! Street Fighter 4! Street Fighter 4! Street Fighter 4!
Despite the fact that I personally put an ungodly amount of hours into this version of the game as a little kid, I never actually thought to myself how the developers at Capcom went about creating the game, so I looked online for interviews that explain this. Developer information regarding this version of Street Fighter 4 specifically is challenging to find, but I was able to discover an interview with the game's producer, Takeshi Tezuka, that details how he went about creating the initial plans for the game. So, a fighting game on the iPhone, how did you approach that? I used to create arcade games, and the equipment is kind of similar to the iPhone. It's similar, but there's no buttons on it. It is different, the device is completely different, but the behavior for game users is very similar. When you go to game centers, you want to jump in and play a game spontaneously, and the iPhone is the same thing. It's like an arcade experience. I don't know how much of this statement was just marketing talk, but if we go by what this interview claims, then Tezuka's belief that the iPhone's ability to let players quickly jump into a game was the driving force between the development of Street Fighter 4 iOS. Tezuka also states in this interview that this game specifically was made for fans of Street Fighter 2 who played it back in the 90s, and the pick up and play nature of this iOS port was meant to appeal to them specifically. I'm sure we're all wondering about this, so I'll elaborate on the elephant in the room. How does one play a game like Street Fighter on a smartphone? Well, it's actually surprisingly simple. Go onto the normal 6-button layout that we're all used to, because we now only have 4 buttons, as well as a virtual joystick on the left which is used for movement. There's punch, kick, special, and focus, and you can perform super and ultra combos by tapping their respective meters at the top of the screen. While Street Fighter 4 iOS can obviously never be as precise as the home console version in terms of gameplay, it kinda gets close, and having to only juggle between 4 buttons as opposed to 6 is great because it reduces the amount of actions you have to do in order to get moves out on the touchscreen. Doing regular Street Fighter 4 combos on this, or even this, is fine, but on this? Nah, it's not happening. So the new control scheme is appreciated. I hate saying this because it reminds me of the passage of time that simply never ends, but I played this game around 8 to 10 years ago, I think, and even as a little kid, I thought that the controls worked pretty well. I was able to move around and perform combos very consistently with every character that I tried, and I quite liked the gameplay experience overall. Speaking of characters, the game launched with 8 of them, with iconic figures like Sagat, for example, being added later as free DLC, and even DJ made it in despite not being in vanilla Street Fighter 4 on home consoles. This iOS port also features multiple stages and modes, so it actually has more content than one might think. The main one is arcade mode, and this is what you would expect. You fight a bunch of enemies, you beat the final boss, and then you see an ending. That's it. The anime intro and outro movies from the home console release aren't present in this version due to file size and memory restrictions, but I still like how this windscreen looks, so it doesn't bother me personally. There's also a mode called Dojo, and this acts as your tutorial. Not only does it teach you the basics of the iOS port-specific control scheme, but it also tells you about combos and basic Street Fighter 4 strategies, as well as giving you a rundown of character command lists. It's also possible to fight against other players offline using Bluetooth connectivity, and while there's no online play in this version, having the option to fight others wirelessly who are around you is really cool, especially for 2010. I'm actually quite amazed at all the content found in this version of the game, because while Capcom could have thrown out a quick cash grab to capitalize on the success of the home console and PC versions of the game, they put genuine care and effort into this port, and it shows. Reviews are a bit hard to find due to their age, but the ones I found from IGN and GamesRadar are very positive, with the latter outlet even giving it a 9 out of 10. That's pretty good. The lack of online play was the main criticism directed towards the game, and while some didn't like the digitized sprites and touch-based control scheme, reception overall to the game was very positive, and some posts I found from the now-defunct Shoryuken forums, rest in peace, reveal that regular players enjoyed the game too. The future of Street Fighter as a series on iOS was looking extremely bright, and Capcom wasted no time in getting another version out the door, so let's move on to that. Street Fighter IV Volt Battle Protocol, or just Volt for short, is an update to the previous iOS port. Featuring new characters like Cody, Balrog, and Vega, and new features like online play, Volt is essentially the previous game but just better. The UI also got updated too, and I love the new blue-focused color scheme that they went with. Nothing like that was ever done in the home console versions, and I think it looks really cool. Along with the game's logo, that gradient on the main Street Fighter IV logo is sick! The game brings over the same modes from the previous version, but it also includes a new one called Wandering Warrior. I don't think I ever played this as a kid, but I found a quote online that describes the mode in detail. This mode has you creating an avatar for your multiplayer profile which can be leveled up and upgraded in an almost RPG-like fashion. Then, while you're facing an opponent in an online or local multiplayer match, your avatar will square up against your opponent's avatar and they'll duke it out as well. Special points are earned during multiplayer matches which can be put towards upgrading your avatar and unlocking new icons and badges which grant new abilities and enhancements. I can't comment personally on my experience with this mode since I never played it, but honestly it sounds pretty cool. The major selling point of Volt, however, was the addition of online play. I found quotes online of people saying that the online component of the game wasn't amazing, and that they would have to normally play laggy matches semi-frequently, but on those rare occasions where everything worked normally, the netcode was fantastic. Other than that, the basic survival, arcade, training, etc. modes from Vanilla's iOS port all made a return, and new characters arrived with regular updates that Capcom would release over time to keep the hype train alive. Capcom even went as far as to lower the price of the game and then add Sakura and Makoto, as well as adding in a system that punished rage quitters from leaving online matches early by reducing the amount of rank points that was tied to their profile. This honestly sounds pretty good, but given how spotty internet connections can be nowadays, let alone in 2011, I can imagine a few people were punished by this system because their connection dipped while they were on the go, but it's still a good system to have, and it means that an early 2010s port of Street Fighter to smartphones received rage quit punishments earlier on in its lifespan than the average modern Tekken game. After this, Capcom reduced the price of the game once again, and they also added in Yoon and Fei Long. Reducing the price of the game multiple times while consistently adding in more content is very consumer friendly, and I'm honestly surprised that Capcom would do such a thing, to be honest. There's even a cheat code you can input to play as Akuma if you have the original game installed on your system too. In terms of gameplay, audio, and graphics, it's pretty much the same as the original, and this means that Volt also received critical acclaim. Today, it has a Metacritic score of 80, which is very good for a dated mobile game. After lots of updates throughout the year of 2011, support for the game finally ended, and while people still continued to play it, there were no more updates. Street Fighter IV continued, and no more iOS ports, nada, nothing. And in early 2016, Street Fighter V was released, and the reign of Street Fighter IV was over. But that didn't stop Capcom from throwing their hat into the ring one more time. The final iOS port of Street Fighter IV, subtitled Champion Edition, is the most definitive version of these mobile-focused games. Champion Edition features 32 characters, with some of the new fighters being Juri, Elena, Evil Ryu, and Dan, meaning this iOS port has more characters than the original home console release of Street Fighter IV. It's also just over 2 GB in size, which is pretty big for a mobile game, but with its large amount of characters and modes, I see why the game is as big as it is. Despite it playing and sounding the same as the previous versions of the game, Champion Edition has some really cool and unique features, like a mode for combo trials and the ability to natively use wireless controllers if you really want to avoid using the touch controls. One major improvement over Vanilla and Volt is that Champion Edition uses high-definition art for its characters. Older versions of the iPhone couldn't display such detailed art on their displays, so with the brand new technology Apple incorporated into their devices from the mid-2010s onwards, Capcom was able to improve the art quality substantially for Champion Edition. All the characters on the character select screen look awesome, and the ability to choose a different color for your main is a really nice touch. Champion Edition is also playable in full widescreen even on devices like the iPad, which is a feature that Volt did not have, and it makes the game look even better, and you can tell that the art looks higher quality than Volt's on the windscreen at the end of arcade mode. Also, it's a super small thing, But the game also shows you the command list on the loading screen, as opposed to making you wait for it to load, and then view it, which is how it used to be handled. The only sort of letdown, I suppose, with the graphics that I have are the stages. There are a lot of stages, which is amazing, but having them remain as low quality still images sort of cheapens the visual aspect of the game. But look, again, I understand that the file size issues are the reason for this, so it's all good. I mentioned before that the game has over 30 characters, but just like with Vault, some of them were added over time in free updates. Champion Edition launched with 25 characters, which is already quite a lot, but Capcom were persistent with adding more content via updates, which shows that they were committed to improving the game over time. If it's just Street Fighter 4 Vault with more characters, features, and high quality art, and a widescreen mode, then it should have been a slam dunk, right? Well, Champion Edition actually has a pretty average score on Metacritic, and I have a theory as to why. Due to the original Street Fighter 4 iOS port and Vault being released during the early 2010s, mobile games of this scale were very rare, especially those with full online play. By 2017, however, higher quality mobile games with HD art were the norm, so Champion Edition's offerings were way too little, too late to most. The game isn't bad, and while it's nice that Capcom released an updated offering for the Street Fighter 4 iOS community, most people had moved on by that point, I feel. They aren't perfect by any means, but I remember having loads of fun with these games, especially Vanilla and Vault. It's a major shame that these are gone from the App Store, but if you have an Android device, I assume there's a way to install them onto your phone for free, wink wink, nudge nudge, and if you want to legitimately own one of them, Champion Edition is still readily available on both iOS and Android, and on my iPhone, as I record this video, it's actually on sale right now. The amount of content these games had was insane, especially for really cheap mobile games in the early 2010s, so I have to give it up to Capcom here, they did an amazing job with these ports. Fighting games are now represented on mobile through swipe-based gameplay via a free-to-play model with microtransactions like with Mortal Kombat, or they take the form of beat-em-ups, but honestly, in my opinion, none of these come close to the Street Fighter 4 iOS ports. I know that I may sound like a bit of a Capcom shill, but I genuinely had a lot of fun with these games as a kid, and I wish I could play Vanilla and Vault again on my iPhone. If you made it all the way to the end, thanks for watching, and let me know in the comments if you ever played one of these games. I'll see you in the next one.